The movie begins by showing a man named Longfellow Deeds. He is a friendly man who runs a pizza restaurant in a small American town. He is well loved by his customers due to his generous nature and his talent for reciting poems that he writes himself. Deeds has always been interested in poetry and has aspirations to become a published poet. However, despite sending his works to numerous publishers, he has yet to find success. In addition to entertaining his customers, Deeds is also known for small acts of kindness, such as handing out free pizzas to those in the area around the restaurant. One day, Deeds is approached by two men, Chuck Cedar and Cecil Anderson, who claim to be employees of his uncle's company. They tell Deeds that he is the ultimate heir to his uncle's assets and shares in the company. Deeds is surprised by this news, as he was unaware that he had a wealthy uncle. Just a few days earlier, rumors had circulated that Deeds' uncle, Preston Blake, had died at the age of 82 while attempting to climb Mount Everest during a major storm. As one of the most influential businesspeople in New York City, Blake's passing had been widely reported in the press, causing the shares of Blake Media, the television company he led, to plummet. In an effort to save the company, Chuck Cedar, the CEO of Blake Media, announces that Preston Blake had an heir named Longfellow Deeds and sends his employees to search for him. They eventually locate Deeds at his pizza restaurant in a small town. When Chuck and Cecil first approached Deeds, he was skeptical about their claims that he had a successful uncle who had built a successful business. Despite never having met his uncle in person, Deeds eventually trusts Chuck and agrees to travel to New York to take over his uncle's business. On the day of Deeds' departure, many of the residents of his small town come to see him off, as they consider him one of the most generous and helpful citizens. As he boards the plane provided by Chuck and Cecil, Deeds is friendly and welcoming to everyone on board, even inviting the pilots to join him in singing. However, Chuck is not pleased with Deeds' behavior, as he has an ulterior motive for bringing Deeds to New York. He wants to exploit Deeds' innocence in order to gain control of his uncle's wealth. When Deeds arrives in New York City, Chuck and Cecil drive him to his uncle's large and luxurious mansion, where he is greeted by Emilio Lopez, one of the servants who has worked for Deeds' uncle for a long time. Deeds is kind and friendly to all of the servants in the house, making everyone feel comfortable with his presence. However, Chuck is unhappy with Deeds' treatment of the servants and asks Emilio to keep an eye on Deeds. Emilio, who dislikes Chuck's attitude, refuses the request and is instead impressed by Deeds' kindness. Deeds often jokes with Emilio in his free time, further strengthening their bond. One day, Chuck and other corporate leaders at Blake Media hold a meeting, and Deeds, wanting to help his uncle's company, asks if he can attend. Chuck forbids Deeds from attending and tells him that he is only allowed to sign letters that Chuck prepares. Suddenly, Kevin Ward, a football athlete, storms into the meeting room and demands that the company pay him a higher fee, threatening to stop working with Blake Media if they do not comply. Deeds is upset by Kevin's arrogant attitude and hits him, causing Chuck to hate Deeds even more. Later, Babe Bennett, a journalist and producer for a news program, tries to get an exclusive interview with Deeds. To do so, she sets him up to help her when she is confronted by a bad guy on the street. Seeing a woman in need, Deeds immediately comes to her aid and hits the man. Babe thanks Deeds and introduces herself as Paul Dawson, a nurse. Deeds then drives her home to ensure that she is not bullied by any other thugs. A few days after their initial meeting, Deeds surprised Babe by inviting her to a fancy restaurant. Upon arrival, they found that many of the other diners were entrepreneurs who recognized Deeds as the new arrival in New York and Parton Blake's nephew. Deeds was happy to have the company and regaled them with the poem he had written. But much to his embarrassment, the business people laughed and mocked his work. Infuriated, Deeds lashed out, physically attacking some of the people at the table. Feeling embarrassed and upset, Deeds asked Babe to leave the restaurant with him. However, they were soon approached by the famous tennis athlete, John McEnroe, who invited them out for a drink. Without hesitation, Deeds accepted the invitation and Babe was thrilled at the prospect of getting an exclusive interview with the two men. She quickly prepared a hidden camera, which she discreetly placed under her shirt before joining them. The next morning, Deeds woke up with a hangover after his night of drinking with John and Babe. Chuck soon arrived to inform him that the media had gotten wind of his behavior at the fancy restaurant, and that it had caused Blake Media's stock value to plummet. Chuck urged Deeds to apologize and be more careful in the future. At her news agency, Babe and her colleagues were celebrating the success of their trending story. Babe hatched a plan to get more exclusive information about Deeds by inviting him to meet her at a park. Deeds, intrigued by Babe, eagerly agreed to meet her again. As he left to meet Babe, Deeds stumbled over a table and discovered his uncle's diary. When he finally met Babe, Deeds shared the story he had read in the diary about his uncle's dream of becoming a DJ. Babe, wanting to impress Deeds, also revealed that she had always wanted to be a journalist, but had to give up her dream to fulfill her parents' wishes of becoming a nurse. Deeds was even more impressed by Babe after hearing her story. As they were walking home, Deeds and Babe stumbled upon a fire in an apartment building. They watched as firefighters struggled to persuade a woman to jump out of a window to save herself from the flames. The woman refused, saying she couldn't leave behind her beloved cat. Without hesitation, Deeds climbed up to the top floor of the apartment and managed to rescue both the woman and her cat. Babe's news agency reported on Deed's heroic act, but unfortunately, her partner edited the video to make Deeds look foolish. Babe was angry at her partner's behavior. When Deed saw the news, he was upset and confided in his best friend, Jan, through a chat app. Jan tried to comfort Deeds, reminding him of his uncle's successful company that employed 50,000 people. The next day, Deeds and Chuck were playing tennis when Deeds announced that he had changed his mind about selling the shares he owned in Blake Media. He wanted to remain in New York and help run his uncle's company, much to Chuck's dismay. Chuck tried to come up with a plan to acquire Deeds' shares for himself. After their game, Chuck met with Mac McGrath, an associate of Babe's, and learned of a scheme to get Deeds out of New York. Eager for details, Chuck inquired about the plan, and Mac revealed that Babe was actually a journalist who had been lying to Deeds. The following day, Deeds took Babe on a surprise visit to her hometown. Babe, who had fabricated stories about her hometown and childhood, was taken aback. When they returned to New York that evening, Deeds recited a poem to Babe before she went inside her house. Seeing Deeds' sincerity, Babe couldn't deny her own feelings for him anymore. However, she also felt guilty for lying to someone as kind as Deeds for the sake of her job as a journalist. As a result, Babe made the decision to confess all of her lies to him. On the day that Babe intended to come clean about her true identity, Chuck had already informed Deeds of the truth. Deeds was disappointed and angry with Babe, and without a word, he left the scene. He was heartbroken and hurt by Babe, whom he had trusted so fully. In an effort to clear his head, Deeds decided to return to his hometown. He also agreed to give Chuck all of his stock in Blake Media, much to Chuck's delight as his plan to get Deeds out of the company had been successful. A few days later, Babe visited Deeds' pizza place, feeling guilty for the lies she had told him. However, when she arrived at the restaurant, she found that Deeds was not there. She encountered Jan, Deeds' best friend, instead. Babe said that she wanted to apologize to Deeds for all the lies she had told him, but Jan, upset with Babe, refused to allow her into the restaurant. The two of them got into a fight as a result. After defeating Jan in their fight, Babe finally learned Deeds' new delivery address for his pizzeria. However, before she could greet Deeds, she accidentally stepped on a pond covered in snow and fell in. She called out to Deeds for help, but he was hesitant to assist her, thinking she was tricking him again. Eventually, seeing that Babe was really in trouble, Deeds waded into the pond to save her. Though he helped her, Deeds remained distant and told Babe to return to New York, rejecting her feelings of love. Heartbroken, Babe spent her nights drinking in a bar. One night, she saw a news report that Blake Media was reportedly bankrupt and Chuck was planning to sell all of his shares. This spurred Babe to come up with a plan to stop Chuck. The next day, Chuck called a meeting to sell his stock in Blake Media. As the meeting began, Deeds arrived to vote against Chuck's decision. He argued that selling the company would result in many employees losing their jobs, and convinced the shareholders to vote against Chuck's plan. Suddenly, Babe appeared with a document in hand. She went on stage and revealed her findings on Preston Blake's true heir. It turns out, the rightful heir was not Deeds, but Emilio, a servant of Blake's. Babe had discovered this through various sources, including Blake's diary. With this revelation, Emilio was officially the leader of Blake Media. Overjoyed, Emilio took the stage and promptly fired Chuck, who had been trying to destroy the company that his father had built. As a gesture of gratitude, Emilio also gave Deeds $1 billion for his sincerity. Eventually, Deeds chose to return home and restart his pizzeria business, finding happiness and living a peaceful life. His joy was further compounded by the fact that he and Babe had reconciled and reconnected. Deeds' dream of becoming a famous poet also came true, as his poem was finally published. Those who saw his success were delighted for him. In celebration, Deeds even bought luxury cars for all the people in his hometown. The final scene of the movie showed a row of these luxury cars belonging to the townspeople parked on the streets, as everyone rejoiced in Deeds' kindness. The moral that can be learned from this movie is that sincerity is rewarded with the goodness of others, while wrongdoing is met with consequences.